Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and this episode has been almost 3 years in the making. I am both honored and giddy to introduce today's guest, Robert Holden, Ph.D., who has been a mentor and spiritual teacher to me for the past 3 years. When this episode releases, we will be celebrating the 1-year birthday of Inspire Campfire. Robert's encouragement and teachings were at the very center of the inspiration that I received to start this podcast, and for that, I am so grateful. Robert is a New York Times best-selling author of 13 books, including Happiness Now, Shift Happens, Authentic Success, and Life Loves You, which he co-wrote with Louise Hay. He works as a consultant to leaders and organizations on themes of purpose and leadership. He teaches public programs on living your purpose, including mastermind groups and retreats. Robert's work has been featured on The Oprah Winfrey Show, Good Morning America, a PBS special called Shift Happens, and 2 major BBC TV documentaries on happiness. Now, over the past year, this podcast, we've shared stories of ordinary people and their extraordinary stories of adventure. More importantly, we've talked about the voice inside that calls us to those adventures. And Robert Holden is responsible for helping me to recognize my own voice inside. I've learned so much from him, and it's my great joy to have him on the show. And the timing couldn't be better because he has a new book coming out this week called Higher Purpose: How to Find More Inspiration, Meaning, and Purpose in Your Life. I had the chance to read an advanced copy, and it is so good. This is a very special day indeed. Robert, welcome to the campfire.
Scott, thank you very much. I share in your giddiness. We've both had to be a bit patient, haven't we, to do this?
We have.
But I think this is good timing. It's nice to be riding the wave of a new book, and therefore an important conversation to be having in the world. And I want to congratulate you on 1 year of doing Inspire Campfire. How cool is that? I mean, a year. Can
It
you believe
is,
it?
and it's super cool to have you here to kind of celebrate that with me, especially all that we've been through. I wondered, Robert, if we could just start for listeners, if you could kind of just give us a little bit more about your story, kind of leading up to writing a book about purpose. How did we get to this point?
That's a small question that deserves a good answer, a big answer perhaps. But I mean, I would say in some ways, higher purpose is I've just received my copy, by the way. It's
Oh, it's
quite
beautiful.
exciting to get a sort of physical copy. This is part memoir, really. In many ways, this is a write-up of every other book I've written. And it's a write-up of the journey, that journey that happens from looking for your purpose to really living it. And, I think that for me, I've always been interested in those big questions in life. Questions about, what is happiness? What is success? Why are we here? How can we live a good life? Those questions have always interested me. I've always been inspired by them. But I think I was also forced into asking some of those questions too from a very early age. I grew up in a little village in the UK called Littleton. So it
Mm.
was very little. And we had one pub, one bus stop, one cricket pitch. There wasn't a lot going on. Except that in my family, both my mum and my dad were really tending to their own wounds and their own demons, if you like. We
Yeah.
we were a very loving family, Scott. I know how much my mum loved me and how much I loved her. I know how much my dad loved me and how much I loved him. But they were carrying wounds,
Hmm.
and we always knew about my mum's wound, which was really depression,
Hmm.
recurring bouts of depression, which are very, very difficult for everybody to deal with. Anybody who's experienced depression knows how difficult it is. When mum's depression would arrive, it would arrive unannounced. We would never be expecting it. And then this guest, if you like, would stay for a few days, um, or sometimes weeks, or sometimes she'd have to leave home and go into a hospital.
Mm.
So that was incredibly painful. Um, but then with my dad, when I was a teenager, that's when we became aware that he was dealing really with his own difficulties. He was
Hmm.
always supporting mum, so the focus was on mum. And then we realized that he was dealing with his difficulties, and for him, he was really dealing with his difficulties with alcohol. So he was experiencing alcoholism, and he actually left home when I was about 15,
Hmm.
and he lived homeless for the last 10 years of his life, on and off. He had places to live, but he was often homeless. And so, those two heartbreaks, traumas, wounds, whatever you want to call them, honestly, Scott, they, um, I think, somersaulted me forward into an inquiry in life about, like, well, what is life really for, and what's
Right.
real purpose of life?
Right.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, it was a lot to take, it was a lot to deal with. But one of the things that it really taught me is that, see, a lot of people think they can't live their purpose because they have experienced wounds, that they have had a trauma in their life. But actually, what I've learned is that your traumas and your wounds aren't blocks to your purpose. They're actually doorways to your purpose.
Mm.
They start off looking like blocks for sure. And you think to yourself, well, I can't live the life I wanted to live because X happened and Y happened and Z happened. But actually, after a while, once you really meet these wounds and these traumas with enough support, and enough love and enough insight, you begin to see that actually they are all somehow part of the big plan. These traumas, these wounds are what kick you out of ordinary.
Yes, part of the hero's journey, which we're going to talk about.
See how I gave you a good feed there, Scott?
You did, and I definitely we're definitely gonna go there. We talk about the hero's journey on this podcast, but, before we jump there, so, kind of jumping into your 20s and your journey kind of getting started here and, writing books, and you
Yeah,
somehow end up on the Oprah Winfrey Show. I mean, how does that happen?
yeah, you can't plan for that. There's not a marketing campaign
Yeah.
that's gonna make that happen. But again, what I would say, this is the magic of living a purpose-centered life.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, what I knew early on was that I wanted to live a meaningful life. And because of what had happened to my mum and my dad, I really didn't just want a job. I didn't just want a salary. I didn't just want a career. I didn't have an ideal like that to live up to. All of that crashed. I should point out my dad was very successful in business,
Mm.
for example. So for him to end up alcoholic, that was a disillusionment. I was hit by a disillusionment before I'd even begun. But that disillusionment again was part of living a purpose-centered life. I started asking questions. And I decided to study psychology and philosophy. I found a program at Birmingham, which is in the middle of the UK, and second city of the UK after London. And it was a program which offered me modules on psychology, philosophy, sociology, linguistics. So it gave me this great, wonderful opportunity to explore life and to be able to live with some of those big questions. And after 3 years, I still wasn't ready for a job. So I took on another 3 years of study. But these were really 3 years of self-directed study. So I signed up for courses on psychotherapy, philosophy, spirituality. I just took as many courses as I could
Mhm.
in that time. And, I met people along the way. I came across my supernatural aid, another Joseph Campbell term. And one of those people actually was a fellow student on my 3-year degree program he was a mature student on the program. We were all 18 years old. He was 24,
Okay.
very mature. He was 6 years older than us, and he was really interesting. His name was Avanti. He sat at the back of the class. He was always the last in and always the first out, and none of us knew anything about him. I knew that there was something about him, but I also felt rather nervous around him, a little bit intimidated by him. But anyway, I decided about 6 or 7 weeks into term, I thought to myself, right, I'm going to say hello to this chap. So the school bell went for the end of class. He was already running off. I ran after him, caught up with him, and I said, "Hi, Avanti, my name's Robert." He said, "Yes, I know." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, we're on the same course, aren't we? And we haven't even spoken yet." And I said something like, "What made you choose this course?" And he said to me, "Well, I came to meet you."
Wow.
And yeah, and that threw me. And I said something like, "Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you."
Yeah.
He's a bit mysterious, a bit strange, but you know what? He was a yogi. He was a student of philosophy and metaphysics, and the first book he ever gave me was the Bhagavad Gita,
Mhm.
and that book absolutely opened my eyes to living an inspired life rather than simply a doing the thing of a career, a retirement, and a well-attended funeral. It was like, I'm going for this inspired life.
Yeah.
And the Bhagavad Gita is it's a poem, actually, 2,500 years old, but it tells the story of an encounter between Arjuna, who's on a battlefield, unsure of what move to make next, feeling lost, alone and uncertain, and his charioteer, Krishna, is there to guide him and support him on his journey. And he points out there are these paths you can take in life. And if you take them, and if you're brave, you will live an inspired life, and it will be full of purpose and meaning and synchronicity and wonder. And you may even end up on the Oprah Winfrey Show or on Scott's Inspire Campfire podcast.
I
Um,
love it. Hey everyone, it's Scott here. This podcast is a passion project for me because I absolutely love adventure. And it's thanks to the effort of my residential real estate team here in Charlotte, North Carolina, that many of you know as the W Realty Group, that this podcast gets funded. This awesome group of people have unmatched levels of competence and caring for our clients. If you know of anyone looking to buy or sell a home, our team serves the Charlotte, North Carolina market, but we can also help you find an agent anywhere throughout the US or Canada through our highly connected network. When you support our real estate business, you are also supporting this podcast. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your referrals. They're right there together. Those two shows. They're
Well,
they're
you
both
see, the
great.
thing is, you never know, do you? Once you start living a life of purpose, really, you are signing up to a plan that you are not in control of. It's a plan that's bigger than yours. It's a plan you can't make up. You and I could not have found a way to be friends if we weren't living purpose-centered lives. I'm convinced of that. It was the purpose, our shared sense of purpose that brought us together, Scott. And it's one of the reasons why I think we enjoy each other's company so much, is because we are sort of encouraged and heartened by each other's sense of going for our purpose, saying yes to our purpose, being brave, and trying stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it's true. The story of how you and I came to be connected, there was just a whole series of karmic synchronicities and
Hmm.
people that I met along the way that kind of, showed me signs and pointed me to things. And I read one of your books and then became aware of your success intelligence mastermind, and thought to myself, like, why would Robert Holden want me to be part of this? But somebody else encouraged me to apply, and I said yes. And 2 or 3 days later, had a personal email from Robert Holden inviting me to be part of this group. And so, it just opens this whole world. But that it just so happens that the Success Intelligence Mastermind that I participated in happened to take place right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Hmm.
And like, what a miracle that was to be part of that group led by you in such a difficult time.
Yeah.
But I remember we had some one-on-one mentoring sessions during that mastermind, and I will never forget that one session that we had where you introduced me to this concept of the hero's journey.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of your book, Higher Purpose, and you talk about it in there. But because the hero's journey has become such a sort of a framework for the stories that we tell on this podcast, I would love for the listeners to hear from Robert Holden a little bit more about this thing called the hero's journey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a chapter in the book called The Hero You Are. It starts page 57. And let's see, maybe I could just share with you a little bit from this. But
Please.
yeah, here I just say Joseph Campbell's map of the hero journey has been a great help to me in my quest for meaning and purpose. I've watched The Power of Myth more times than any other documentary, and I'm more inspired by it each time I watch it. In a recent interview, I was asked to name my desert island book. That's easy. It's A Course in Miracles. I told my interviewer that if I could also take a desert island DVD with a special solar powered DVD player, it would be the Power of Myth DVD series. So, this particular series, which is a PBS special, of course, and is a series of conversations between Joseph Campbell, the creator of the hero journey, and also Bill Moyers, who is his great friend. um, the two of them create this wonderful conversation over 6 episodes where they are talking about the power of myth and the hero's journey. And I have to say, yeah, when I first came across this, Scott, I was absolutely enthralled. It made perfect sense. Here was a map that everybody can relate to. And it's the map that really takes us, I think, from an ordinary life into an extraordinary life, a life of great adventure. And I really had the sense when we were meeting that you were on the threshold. You had all the hallmarks to me of being on the threshold of a new adventure. And I wanted you to have this map because it had been such a great help for me. And I just trusted and hoped that it might be a great help for you. So what can we say about the hero's journey? I mean, I think it's enough to say that it happens in essentially 3 acts. And the 3 acts of the hero's journey are very much in alignment with the sort of the 3 acts that also take part in very much in dramatic theory as well, going all the way back to the Greeks. So Joseph Campbell wasn't really inventing something with the hero's journey. He was really observing a
Mhm.
pattern that exists in all of our stories. That's why his book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, that was the title for the book, was this idea that we all of us are really following, in a way, the same map, but we're all
Mhm.
taking the journey in our own way. Yeah. And we start with the initiation, and the initiation is usually getting kicked out of ordinary.
Yeah.
And for me, getting kicked out of ordinary was absolutely what happened to my mum and dad. That's what set me on my path. But getting kicked out of ordinary can, that can happen to you in all sorts of ways. Um, how did it happen for you, Scott? I mean, how did you get kicked out of ordinary?
I think it was like around the time that I became connected with you. I think you might remember me talking about this with the group when I first introduced myself. But my whole life have spent my mornings alone, right? Reading and digesting. And, I kind of had this morning routine, and it was a spiritual time for me.
Hmm.
Um, but there was the rest of the day that came along, and it was just getting pounded with emails and just getting sucked into the daily routine. And I just, as the more this went on, the more I was feeling like disconnected from myself. Like there was
Hmm.
this, I called it my pre 8 a.m. Scott, and then
Yeah.
there was my post 8 a.m. Scott.
Yeah.
And I think my objective when I met you was just sort of like figuring out how to integrate these two Scotts. And I think my goal at that point was to bring the pre 8 a.m. Scott, more of my pre 8 a.m. Scott, to that post 8 a.m. Scott. And that's
Yeah.
and that's what we did in that Success Intelligence Mastermind. And I continue to work on that now. But
Hmm.
it was that feeling of like being disconnected with myself, I think.
Yeah, and so that's a great example of how, getting kicked out of ordinary, or if you like, or yours was more of what I'd call a voluntary step to actually end ordinary, to move away from ordinary. Up until that point, ordinary was, pre 8 a.m. Scott and then post 8 a.m. Scott. But that ordinary, which had worked for you for a while, and it really had, let's be clear, that was working well, now wasn't working as well for you as you wanted it to. And, one of the things that I remember from our conversations was it was that sense of aliveness. You wanted to get that sense of aliveness that could run all through your day rather than just early on in your day. And that's a big factor, I think, in Joseph Campbell's work. In Joseph Campbell's work, when we take on the hero's journey, we are saying yes to an adventure. And what we're really saying yes to is often a sense of aliveness. And I think
Mhm.
that's partly what you were doing there. So sometimes when we begin the hero's journey, it can come from inspiration. It can come from meeting somebody new. That's again, in a way, how it happened for me with when I met Avanti as well. He was part of that. Um, but also, I would say actually that happened a little bit after what we call crossing the threshold. But there is just this sense of getting kicked out of ordinary. I also want to say, by the way, I this book is my COVID project. And
Yeah.
so getting kicked out of ordinary, there's a whole chapter in here essentially on, I call it the death of normal, where I'm really looking at COVID as being our collective getting kicked out of ordinary.
Yeah.
So sometimes getting kicked out of ordinary is also collective, not just individual. It's something that happens to a lot of us. And it can come from a pandemic. It could come from a forest fire in our community. It could come from an energy crisis. It could come from a war. All of these things that disturb the normal or the ordinary are normally what get us into the journey.
Yeah, I mean, I love this. And so where does this voice that calls us to adventure come into play?
This voice, I would suggest to you, is your original voice. It's been with you the whole time. It's available to you your whole life, but it will speak up for you at certain points in your life when you most need to hear it. And this voice is, I say we've all got one. In higher purpose, I also very much I'm inspired by the work of Carl Jung.
Mhm.
And Carl Jung talks about the need for us to have a vocation. And he says that anybody who has a vocation has been addressed by a voice. And that voice, once again, is I would call it our original voice. It's that truth voice that exists in each and every one of us, and it is the voice that guides us the whole time, whether we're listening to it or not. But it is up to us to listen to it. So we may experience that voice literally audibly, but I would also like to say that we use voice as a metaphor. So it might be that it's more of a sense for you rather than a voice. It might be a feeling that you get in your bones. It may well be a nudge that you get, in your body somehow. It can be a feeling you experience in your heart. It's a sense of living a guided life. I think that's the thing we would say. You are the metaphor I like to use in higher purpose is that you are pulled by a golden thread.
Mm,
Okay, I'm borrowing here from a Greek myth, but it's this idea that we are pulled by a golden thread. Yeah.
mm. And part of the hero's journey is the refusal of the call.
Yes, exactly. So what makes the hero's journey so dramatic, I suppose, is that we are called. We've had that encounter with inspiration. Our life has been turned upside down. We have experienced a wound. Um, Things have changed, and therefore we are asked to say a hearty yes to our adventure. And the first thing we are going to do, Joseph Campbell says, is we will refuse the call. There will be those other voices in our mind which say, hey, wait a minute, not so fast. That old normal that we're about to let go of, was it really that bad? you know and so there's this sense of better the devil you know. There's that sense of, well, look, this normal wasn't great, but at least I knew what it was, and at least it was predictable. Hey, I was functioning. Hey, there was some money in the bank. Hey, yeah, I had status. Do we want to throw away status, for this new adventure, which seems to have no guarantees to it? I was doing pretty well. I had some credentials. I could still use those initials after my name. Are we sure we want to give all of that up? So there's essentially like a debate that happens here.
Yeah.
And so we may delay saying yes to the call. We may even for a while just decide to stick with normal. And, you know, a lot of the times what happens is you have this sense of, well, okay, I'm back with normal now. And it's going pretty well, except that I'm not feeling alive. And I'm finding it difficult to wake up each day and really get excited about my life. And so this is safe, b- but maybe there's more to life than simply playing it safe. And so eventually, after a while, I think the call gets represented to us again and again and again. And eventually, I think it occurs to us that it's more of a risk not to say yes to the call than it is to say yes to the call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It becomes a risk worth taking. It's this sense of, oh, darn it, I've got to do this, because if I don't do this, it just doesn't feel right in my body. It doesn't feel good in my heart, and my head's foggy, and I just can't seem to do the thing I used to do before. I've got to do this.
Yeah. So then what happens when we do finally say yes?
Often we hit we're now basically we're crossing the threshold,
Mhm.
and usually you get some sort of a reward, you get some sort of a treat. In fact, I was coaching somebody yesterday, um, who's really going for something in their lives right now. They're really being brave, and nothing seemed to be happening. And they basically sent up a prayer, like sending a flare up into the sky. You send a flare
Yeah.
up into the sky,
Yeah.
and she just said, "Look, I just said to everybody up there," you're sort of pointing to heaven, you know, "I need a lucky break here." you know and sure enough, like a day later, she gets an invitation, which is exactly what she needs in order to be able to move forward. Sometimes it's like that on in the hero's journey. You make a start and nothing seems to happen. You take that step and you're met by nothing.
Mhm.
Partly this is because you are emptying out from the old normal, by the way. This happens a lot when people like get ordained, when they graduate. You know, they think life's just going to happen now because they're ordained or they're graduated or they're promoted. And it doesn't. If anything, it's like the wind in the sails drops and nothing happens. Yeah. But you hold faith. And once you hold faith, then that gust of wind happens. And that gust of wind can appear in many different ways. For me, for example, it was meeting Avanti. When you cross the threshold, that will be when you might meet your first encounter with supernatural aid. Gandalf will appear. And when Gandalf appears, you've got this friend with you on your journey now. And here's the interesting thing that Joseph Campbell would say is that that friend can't appear. That supernatural aid cannot appear unless you take the step. You
Mm.
must take the step first if the supernatural aid is going to appear. Most of us, Scott, sign up for life the other way around. We say, no, wait a minute, send me the supernatural aid and
Yes.
then I'll take the step. But it seems to work the other way around in consciousness and in creation. We have to take the step first and then the supernatural aid happens. So what was your supernatural aid? Can you think of a like a crossing the threshold moment that made a difference for you?
Well, certainly, meeting you and the 16 people that were part of the Success Intelligence Group.
Yeah.
I was actually in preparation for this call. I went back and looked at my application that I sent in to you. And my two objectives were to find a spiritual teacher and to be able to find a group of people that I can actually talk to, because that pre
Yeah.
8 a.m. Scott sits in my living room by myself and thinks about this stuff and ruminates.
Mm.
And so, to be able to have a group of people that I could actually talk about this stuff with was what it was really all about. And so, I mean, that happened.
Yeah.
And what's great is now here we are almost 3 years from when that group came together, and I still have
Mhm.
all of those friendships and have done other things with those people. I've traveled with those people. It's been an incredible experience. The whole thing has been supernatural for me.
Yeah. And it can be like that. That is one of the joys. That particular mastermind that you're talking about, I think I've done it 7 times now,
Mhm.
and each one of them is a hero's journey for sure. But to watch in particular, you, Scott, yes, in many ways, we were all your supernatural aid, but also you were our supernatural aid as well. And there is something incredibly reciprocal about that sense on the journey, of when we meet each other, the giving and the receiving is it's an exchange, isn't it? And that's one of the great joys about, by the way, of being on the hero's journey, is that you're playing a part in other people's hero's journey,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
exciting.
It's magic. And I mean, when you show up and when you take the risk, when you do things, when you get after it, like, you don't know what's going to show up. Like, but this podcast is a perfect example, because now now a year in, I've had 50 something episodes and have met people along the way, and some of the things that have opened up for me based on guests that I never would have met had we not started this podcast. It's just like, it blows my mind.
Yeah.
Just got back from a trip to the Kingdom of Bhutan with 10 incredible people. And like, there's no way that trip ever would have happened had I not met Karen Dark, who was episode 7. And, she's an incredible person. And, she had this vision for this trip and brought me along. And, it was magic. And all of that felt supernatural to me. So I completely understand this. And that's why I'm so excited to be able to share this all with the listeners here.
Yeah, that's it. That's the magic of it, is that you are letting go of your plan for your life and you are subscribing to a bigger plan. And that certainly takes an act of faith. We have to undo some of our conventions, some of our habits, some of our preferences. And one of them is that we like to be in charge of our own plans.
Mhm.
But actually, when we really humble up, properly humble up, I think we accept that actually life isn't all to do with our own plan. Yes, we can make plans for sure, but there is a bigger plan that overrides everything. And and actually, I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, which is a wonderful sort of psycho-spiritual text, which actually says that it encourages us to stop making plans and to start receiving the plan that is available to us. So we're
Mhm.
still living our life by plans, but they're less under our control and they're more to do with a greater experience that is available to us. And because of that, the need to follow guidance, the need to recognize the golden thread, the need to stay close to what inspires you and that what keeps you alive is vital. It's a whole other way of living. Yeah. And it requires these very, very necessary skills so that you can cross the threshold and get into the journey as such.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, and it's been so inspiring to listen to each of the guests that have been on this podcast and that hero's journey that they've gone through in these, some are micro stories, some are like macro stories, but it's just been so cool to see all of these people going through, what Joseph Campbell has coined as the hero's journey. And I
Yeah.
have to I have to share, because this was something that like was a big aha for me, and was a hook, I guess I would say. But when you told me about The Power of Myth, which is this documentary that Joseph Campbell does with Bill Moyer, it was actually filmed at the George Lucas Skywalker Ranch.
Yeah.
And when you told me that Joseph Campbell was the inspiration behind the Star Wars saga, I mean, you had me right there. Because I'm a born in the 70s, and my whole life has paralleled this whole Star Wars journey, and all of the characters in the Star Wars journey are all perfect examples of what happens on the hero's journey.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when Joseph published his book, which was I think 1949, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, it was, it's a mighty tome. It's a
Mm.
thick book and dense with inspiration and references to myths all over the world. And I think at the time his hope was that this would really get picked up by philosophers and psychologists. But actually, interestingly, it really got picked up by artists, writers, producers, directors, people who saw this journey, a journey of departure, initiation and return, and thought, yeah, hey, hold on a minute. These are the great stories of our life do have a departure, an initiation, and a return. And how about if we were to create some modern stories with this, in a sense? And so he really then became a mentor to many, many great writers, directors, and producers. One of them was George Lucas, um, who, yeah, absolutely credited Joseph as a mentor for the Star Wars journey. But look at any modern film these days, and in particular, by the way, look at a lot of the children's stories, especially the Pixar films. They all begin with the end of normal. If you think of sort of Finding Nemo, any of
Yeah.
the, anything like this always
Yeah.
begins with something that disturbs normal. Then you go from the known world into the unknown world. You go on a journey. You do cross that threshold. You do meet your trials, and you get to return. And when you return, yeah, you bring back what Joseph calls the boon. You bring back the reward, and the reward really is you. You're the reward because you've been on this extraordinary journey and you are now a fully vitalized person who has vitality to share with everybody else.
Yeah. And once you know about the hero's journey, you start to see it everywhere. Like you just
Everywhere.
said. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so you go into detail about this in chapter 2 of the book.
Hmm.
But let's talk about the rest of the book. This is really, really exciting. And I'm so excited that I had the opportunity to read it in advance to prepare for this interview. And I was showing you before we recorded, I got to print so it hasn't come out yet. And I was telling you, I always wondered how the endorsements get in there before the book actually comes out. But now I know I got this PDF version that I was able to cut up and put a cover on. So I had my own little version of it, but it's fantastic. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the book and what it means, higher purpose.
For many years now, I have given talks and master classes on, especially on leading with purpose in
Mhm.
companies and in organizations, um, global brands like Dove and the Real Beauty campaign, and companies like IBM and Google and Virgin, companies that I think are inspired by a great sense of vision and a great sense of purpose as well. I've also, given classes on leading with purpose in schools and universities, in hospitals. I mean, everywhere really, And this was all part of the Success Intelligence project, which Success Intelligence was a boutique consultancy that I started in the year 2000. So we were right on the threshold of a new millennium. And Scott, what I wanted to do was to um, help evolve our definitions of success. I wanted to see if it was possible to create new definitions of success for us, both personally and collectively, new definitions of success that would be good for us and good for the planet too. So, this was very much my work with Success Intelligence. And really, a big part of that was these masterclasses on leading with purpose. Over and above that, I've also run a number of spiritual retreats on living your purpose over the years, and I've been to some great places. I've taken living your purpose to Assisi. I've done that several times. It's pretty much an annual retreat to Assisi. Looking at the work of St. Francis, who I call my patron saint of purpose. He's actually the patron saint of ecology, but he's my patron saint of purpose. But we also have gone to Findhorn and to Glastonbury and many other different places. And in fact, part of that was doing a 1 year hero journey mastermind program,
Yeah.
which I will do again in 2024. We'll do a
Okay.
1 year program on the hero's journey for then, for sure. Um, and I would also say, by the way, the mastermind programs, and in particular, the Success Intelligence Mastermind, I think that was very much those masterminds where we work with a small group of people. The theme of purpose comes up a lot, for sure.
Right.
So, this was, I think it was on the cards. And then actually, the catalyst for writing the book was that I was having a dinner with Reed Tracy, the president of Hay House.
Hmm.
Um, we'd just finished a writers' workshop in Dublin, a 2 day event. We were having dinner in a place called the Garden Room Restaurant at the Mirian Hotel. Outside we had a table, and outside the window was a life-size sculpture of James Joyce, the writer. I remember that. We'd had a lovely evening, and we'd managed not to talk about work or anything very much, and to do with work. But right at the end of the evening, he said, have you ever considered writing a book on purpose? We talked about Wayne Dyer, who was Reed's great friend. Reed and Wayne talked daily, every day for years, and properly every day for years. I was lucky enough to present with Wayne on over 50 I Can Do It conferences for Hay House. So we talked about Wayne's work, living an inspired life, the power of intention, manifest your destiny. And Reed just said, look, I feel like that conversation needs to continue here at Hay House. Would you be interested in doing something? So then COVID happened. Yeah. And, you know, what I say in the book as well, by the way, is what I noticed early on in the pandemic was I noticed that my friends and my clients, the people I coach and mentor, who already had a strong sense of purpose, were using the pandemic as this opportunity to strengthen their commitment to their purpose. Um, I say that, along with the rest of us, they were being forced to adapt, diversify, and cope with the losses, and also reinvent how they worked and lived. They were suffering as much as the rest of us, but they were using their sense of purpose to energize themselves, and it was helping them to be resilient and also to rise to the occasion. They were sustained by their sense of purpose. So that was one group of people. And then what I also noticed was that the effect of the COVID pandemic was that many more people were being willing now to question their purpose. And there was this sense that COVID was inviting people to live a more purpose centered life. And more people were making those brave moves now to switch from just a job or a career or a salary to something much more worthwhile, much more meaningful, and much more sustainable. So I felt the time was right to put this book together. And I basically, this is a write up of everybody who's inspired me on my own journey of living a purpose centered life. And so, I talk about my time with Success Intelligence and that work. I also There's a chapter in the book about the Happiness Project, which I ran all the way through the 90s, and that's how I originally met Oprah Winfrey, was through the Happiness Project. But I also talk about my work on love and loving relationships, my interest in the Enneagram, um, as well. I mean, really, it's just jam packed with with
It is.
everything that's inspired me. Quite honestly, that's has been as important to me as anything. And actually, the I would say the acknowledgements in the book are, just go on and on as well, because there were just so many people who truly inspired me and that were so supportive to me along the way as well. And it took me a good couple of days to write up all of the acknowledgements actually for the book, because there was just so many people who were inspiring me, Scott. So yeah, that gives you a little overview. I mean,
Yeah.
also I'd have to say, I can't, God, it's so easy to leave people out, which is crazy. But I mean, there's a write up essentially of 3 interviews in the book with Maya Angelou. And those 3 interviews, will stay with me forever. I mean, it was
Yeah.
amazing to be in her company and to have her impart her wisdom and her ideas on what it means to live a purpose-centered life. So that's in there too.
And it's a great book, and it really does summarize so much of your work. Like, having known you now for 3 years and really been in part of your masterminds and to kind of see it all in practice. But I'm like, I just kind of wrote down like on my notes here, and I'm just kind of looking through the progression. It's so cool that like you started with happiness, right?
Mhm.
And then it was kind of moving into success and then
Mhm.
love and now purpose, and it just
Yeah.
feels like this really beautiful, like, progression of your life and your teaching, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and, drawing more and more people in. But the book is so good, and I think, like, you talk about how, uh, purpose is not something that we go find, it's something that finds you. And I think as we kind of wrap up on that book, like, could you just talk on that just for a minute?
Yeah, what I would say is that, a lot of people are trying to find their purpose.
Mhm.
The thing about trying to find your purpose is that you often, if you're not careful, you end up missing what's right in front of you. And what I would say is that really you don't ever find your purpose. You recognize your purpose. You have to go to what my wife Holly calls the holy church of noticing. Yeah, the holy church of noticing. You have to pay attention to your life. If you pay attention to your life, you'll recognize your purpose. How will you recognize it? You'll recognize it because your purpose brings you alive. Yeah,
Mm.
you feel that sense of aliveness. You feel that sense of giddiness. You feel that sense of excitement. And what you're excited about, by the way, might be minuscule. It might be so small, it almost doesn't really, nobody else really even notices, but you notice and it lights you up and you love it. You know when you're living your purpose because you feel inspired. Yeah. And you don't need to be entertained quite so much as before. Yeah, you don't need those 900 channels of entertainment because you're inspired and you're living an inspired life. So you don't need to watch a movie every night because you're in your own movie. You're in the movie of your life. You're in your hero's journey. You know when you're following your joy, when you're following your joy, that's a sense of purpose too. Joseph Campbell calls that following your bliss. But it's this sense of when you're really living your purpose, you recognize that you're part of something bigger as well. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about all of us. And actually in the book I try to illustrate that there are these three levels of purpose. There's the level of purpose that's to do with you and it's personal, but then there's another level of personal which is shared, and it's about you and everybody else. And then there's even a universal purpose, a sense of a purpose that we're all part of and that we all need to be part of, by the way, as well. And that is, by the way, I think humanity's great challenge right now is for us to reconnect ourselves with the whole of creation again. In fact, I think maybe this is the purpose of having a purpose, is that when we have a purpose, it connects us again to our heart. It connects us to living a more soulful life. And we become interested in everybody else's life, and we become players in a bigger story, which is the story of creation. And to play a part in that is an amazing thing. And by the way, I also say in the book, if after reading this book you still don't know what your purpose is, I'll make it really easy for you. Just go out and be the most loving person you can be. Yeah. Perform as many acts of kindness as you can today, or even just one, but be the most loving person you can be. Because in the end, the only question you really need to ask is, how can I love the world today?
There it is. How can I love the world today? Robert Holden, thank you so much for that wisdom. That it's beautiful, and I think that's probably what we go out on. But before we do that, I have two questions that I ask everybody on this podcast because you have lived an incredibly inspired life and you have provided inspiration to so many people. At some point, they're going to make a movie about you in Hollywood. And I want to know when they do who the actor is going to be that's going to play you in your movie.
Okay, so the actor that comes to mind is Tim Robbins,
Nice. Yeah.
because I've always been told I look like Tim Robbins. And in fact, I remember once seeing, this was many years ago, I saw Susan Sarandon in a piece of theater at in off Broadway in New York. And I remember my friend said, "Hey, there's Susan Sarandon. Why don't you just go up to her and say, 'Hi, honey, where are we going for dinner tonight?'" Because she was with Tim Robbins, and it was like, just see, she might not even know the difference.
Oh
So
my gosh, I
anyway,
love it. And Shawshank Redemption is one of the best movies of all time.
yeah, no, as well. I mean, he's amazing. And so anyway, I get told I look a lot like Tim Robbins. So if Tim's available
I
and
love it.
he'd like to do that, I'd be really grateful.
That's fantastic. And Robert, what's your movie going to be called?
I'd be happy to go with Higher Purpose.
I love it.
I really would, because I think it's that's my journey, the journey of, you know, uh uh a young boy living in a little village in Littleton, and being absolutely lost, bewildered, and broken, and setting out on an adventure to try and heal my own heart. And along the way, I discovered this sense of purpose and this big game that we can all play in, and that we can all be part of. And this game is about loving each other and loving the world. And I can't think of a better movie to be part of.
Higher purpose. Robert, I think Tim Robbins would be great, but I think you need to star in your own movie.
I think there's a bit of wisdom that, I can take on board for sure.
I love it. Well, I just want to thank you so much for blessing me and my listeners with this time and your wisdom. I can't tell you how grateful I am. For those listening, Robert's book, Higher Purpose, will be out on November 1st. If you're listening to this on or before October 31st, you can pre-order the book and be eligible to win a one-on-one coaching session with Robert and be registered to access his Finding Your Higher Purpose Challenge webinar replays. We've included a link in the show notes. And I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope that Robert's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Robert, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott. Love you.
Love you too.